Shabbat Shalom, everyone. What a week. And after the week that was, and energy that continues to be, it's just very reassuring and comforting to see you and to learn with you, and to be with you and to learn with you, all of you who are learning with us online this Shabbat morning. So let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha beit Yisrael. V'nihiyeh anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai melamed Torah li'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amin, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So Shabbat Shalom. Our agenda this morning is very simple and clear. After this enormously exhausting week, emotionally, many people losing sleep, etc. What are some? And it's very urgent and it's very timely. What are some timeless texts that help? And each of us is going to teach a text that we think helps for about 10 minutes. So, Michelle, you're first.
So my text may help. I was hoping and wanting to reach for some inspiration that could speak to this moment because we're all in need of so much inspiration. Looking at our nation locked half and half, looking from each side to the other, thinking, how could it be that you possibly went that way? And then looking at the numbers this morning of 1,000 people dying in America every day. And instead of inspiring, what I found myself in need of is challenging. How can we understand our moment, and how might we challenge ourselves to be able to grapple with our moment? So I brought a really repulsive text from our tradition. Nobody I know likes this text, and yet it is there in our tradition. And this week it felt really clear to me that it had a message for us that we needed to confront in our nation today. And that is the text of Lot and his daughters. For those of you who may need a little refresher on your memory, Lot, of course, parts from Abraham, Lot's nephew. They go one way, go the other. Lot finds himself settling in Sodom and Gomorrah, where he has men who are in his house as guests, and somebody knocks on the door from the city. They want to rape these men, and Lot very graciously offers up his daughters instead. This is not a beautiful story. And then when Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed, Lot and his daughters flee with his wife along the way. She looks back at Sodom and is turned into a pillar of salt. Okay, Adkan. So that's where we are when we are picking up our text. So would any of you like to read the text?
Sure, I'd love to. I love this text. I just can't get enough of, incest. Next morning, Abraham hurried to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and looking down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of the plain, he saw the smoke of the land rising like the smoke of a kiln. Thus it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain and annihilated the cities where Lot dwelt, God was mindful of Abraham and removed Lot from the midst of the upheaval. Lot went up from Zohar and settled in the hill country with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to dwell in Zohar, and he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. And the older one said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to consort with us in the way of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and let us lie with him, that we may maintain life through our father." That night they made their father drink wine, and the older one went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose.
Okay, stop there. I think that's enough.
I was just getting into it. Oh my
Long
God.
story
Thank you for
short.
this. Thank you for this. What a beautiful
Thank you for
story.
the
Michelle,
insight.
thank you for that.
So long story short, actually, they do lie with their father. The first one, there is this funny little dot, Dan, you'll love this, above one of the words in Hebrew, in terms of the Torah, which says he did not know, right on the word know, which actually the rabbis used to pose a question about whether he knew or did not know in that moment. Of course, it happens again a second night. It's not just the first daughter, it's the second daughter. And then they go on and they have children, and they name these children Moab and Ammon, and they become actually the Moabites and the Ammonites, the enemies of the Jewish people. But there's a twist to this story, and the twist is that Lot's daughters actually wind up having Moabites, which the most famous Moabite is who?
Ruth.
Ruth. And Ruth is the grandmother of who?
David.
David. And David is the vehicle of what, according to Jewish tradition?
Redemption.
Redemption. And so there's something in this story which just sticks. And you think, like, here it is, they commit the ultimate wrong, the most repulsive act. And the question is, why? And how in the world do we get anywhere close to redemption from that? So I want to go dig in just a little bit to a comment that you see, actually, Rashi makes it, but it's also here on page 108 that was Xeroxed in comment 30. Lot went up from Zoar. So if you'll just look, Dan, if you'll read that one, it's not known.
It is not known.
Go ahead.
It is not known why Lot was afraid to stay in Zoar. Perhaps earth tremors continued to be felt there. Later sources have preserved a tradition that all 5 cities of the plain, including Zoar, were destroyed. This would explain why Lot's daughters believed the catastrophe was universal.
Okay, so this comment picks up something that Rashi says, which is, why did they do it? How could you do it? How could you do such a thing? Right? And the answer is, they thought that if they didn't, the world would be destroyed. And I find, actually, that's a really important question for us to look at when we look at our modern political landscape. When each side votes how they vote, they're voting because we believe that it is existential. And in some sense, we're sometimes willing to hold our nose to things that we otherwise might not like all that much. In other circumstances, it would be repulsive to us. And yet the greater value of survival, the greater value of the existential, the world is going to end if I don't do this, motivates us to sublimate that sense of revulsion that we feel in order to act in accordance with a greater value. And one of the challenges for me of this time has been trying to ask that question, how do we ever get to a world where we can understand why somebody else would vote the way they vote? How do we get back to the point where we can talk to the people in our families or in our communities who made an existential choice that was very different than ours? And maybe it starts with Lot's daughters. Maybe it starts by understanding that when people believe that they are acting in the service of preserving a world that will be destroyed, if they do not do that, they make compromises in their value systems. And to me, that sets some, or plants some seeds, perhaps of possibility, to look at the other. The other piece of Lot's daughters is actually the world is not being destroyed. That's actually not their circumstance. But that's the story that they have. Their story, their news that they're reading tells them the world is destroyed. And perhaps if we want to understand that other part of the country, we might start with that, what actually Rabbi Jonathan Sachs brought up for us a few times ago, which is the lack of shared truth, that we no longer share one perspective of our world. When Lot's daughters, I'll call on you one sec, when Lot's daughters look out at their world, they think that they have the story. But they don't have the story. And in fact, what Wes read about Lot went up to Zoar, we actually know it. Like, we know that there's a place called Zoar. It survived Sodom and Gomorrah. They are not indeed in an existential moment. And yet they believe they are, which leads to the last point. And then I'll call on you, Elias, which leads to the last point, which is the Midrash comes along and says that they believe that they are the last ones left, not because they are literally the last ones left, because they know Zoar exists, but because they think no one will have them in Zoar. They think that they interpret how others feel about them, and then they dig in to their position. And that, it feels to me, is a final challenging point that we need to dig into about Lot's daughters for our time. What are the ways in which we as a nation, as families, as individuals, as communities, make others feel like they are associated in one way, painted with one brush, and therefore they assume, well, forget it. I'm not even going to try. My narrative has to be right because you believe that my narrative makes me a bad person. And then from the other direction, what are the ways in which we are not grappling with our own narratives? Elias.
Yes, thank you for this beautiful teaching. As always, as always in the Jewish tradition, we can take so many views and see the text in different ways. When I read this to me and I think about our world these days, the things that comes to mind is, how far are you willing to go in order to preserve your ideals and your beliefs? So thinking about the Lot's daughters, it's a different twist about, sometimes we are so blind by our own ideas that we do whatever it takes to preserve that.
Well,
And,
thank you, Elias, because that's exactly why I wanted to grapple with it this morning, because I do think that we get caught up in that sense of existential threat. Yes.
Yeah,
Wes.
so just in the minute remaining to this beautiful story, I just want to talk about the tikkun, the repair, the restore from the story, which you foreshadowed in the framing of it, which is the birth of David from a Moabite woman. And the Moabite comes about in this very unsavory way. And it feels like when they're in the cave, the one intoxicating her father and having sex with her father, and then the next night, the other daughter intoxicating her daughter, having sex with her daughter, you just think, ugh, this is just so gross, and ugh, it's never going to end. And yet, from this incredibly gross, disgusting, horrible, repulsive, revolting story, comes the Mashiach, comes the King of Israel. And how do you get from here to there? And the answer is Ruth and Boaz. The answer is an act of encounter and kindness. The way that you get to David is Boaz welcoming Ruth. She's a Moabite. He welcomes her in Israel. She's the other. He welcomes her in Israel. And she feels so connected to her mother, Naomi. And so I think that the challenge here, this is pregnant with the solution, which is encounter and kindness.
Good.
And
And also, I love
say
the move.
something?
Wait, just one sec. I love the move that you're making because it's so critically important to see the tikkun that happens. But I also want to push you on the desire to move quickly past this story, because the Ruth and Boaz moment is well ahead of us, and we still need to grapple in our time right now with encountering each other as Lot's daughters, and understand that just because somebody thinks something different than you does not necessarily make them an evil person. They may be acting for what they believe is a greater
I've been biting
good.
my tongue in order not to say this, but we need humor and we need to this gross story. So the moral of the story to me is like, if you sleep with your daughters, you may have a king in future generations.
Okay.
Okay, well, on that very uplifting
Oi,
note,
Elias. No, wait. I cannot leave it there. I cannot leave it there. I think that this story requires us to roll up our sleeves and dig in deep, because our tendency to look at those who are making choices that are different than the choices that we make and see only the parts that are repulsive to us is getting in our way today, right now. Because when we can perhaps give the kind of perspective that understands that they believe their story and they are acting out of a sense of wanting to be good and wanting to preserve a world that they believe in, just as we are acting out of a sense of wanting to preserve a world we believe in, perhaps then we can ultimately come to sit down and find that Ruth and Boaz moment.
thank you.
Cool.
Michelle, Dan, you're up.
Good. Just I did two things about what Michelle said. First of all, the other story where the same thing happens is very similar. With Noah and his daughters, right? It's also a universe that's destroyed. So it comes up in the Torah. The other thing is, I just find it really fascinating that you bring a Rashi that suggests that relative moralism is something that's okay. But we can talk about that later. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
That's such a longer conversation.
We need to move on.
Train conductor, Dan,
Okay.
you're on with your
Yes,
text.
yeah, I know we have so much to talk about.
Yes.
Right, so the text I chose these the texts that appear at the end of the Amidah. We have this opportunity every day, several times a day, to not only pray the Amidah, but to offer private meditations as we finish the Amidah every day. And so I chose the one that appears at the end of Shacharit and one that appears at the end of at Mincha, but they are both different. This the standard one, Elohai Nitzol Shoni Me'ra, but then our Siddur offers us these two other alternatives. And so the first one on page 44. Which is I find both of them fascinating, because this first one is the onus becomes on the individual. So, for instance, Michelle, would you read that one? You hear about Fanecha on page 44, but may it be your will.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
May it be your will, Adonai our God and God of our ancestors, that your compassion prevail over your wrath, and that you turn to us with love. Look kindly upon me and upon all my family. Help us avoid heartlessness. Lead me along a righteous path. Keep me from deceitfulness and from false perceptions. Open my eyes to the wonders of your Torah. Enlighten me with your wisdom, so that I may merit kindness, compassion, and love from you and from all who know me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you, Adonai, my rock and my redeemer.
Right,
Or
so-
as we sing it, be acceptable, be acceptable.
So it's such a beautiful text. If you get up every day and just pray this text and think about this text, this has so many layers to it. First of all, this one particularly, it's simultaneously individual and communal. So the idea that it says look kindly upon me and upon my family. And I've said this before, I truly believe that the way that we interact with our family and the way that we demonstrate our interactions with our family to the rest of the world is really the role model. It's the essence of who we are as human beings. We know many people who act publicly in one way and very differently, with their family. So I think that this is essential. It's essential that who you are at home is really a reflection of who you are in the world. So that's one thing that's there, and also the idea that we ask right away for compassion, because we just know from the beginning that we are more than likely bound for failure, and when we ask for compassion to prevail as opposed to being angry. So here we have this almost the high holiday model of Avinu Malkeinu, where we know that God is Melech, but also Avinu, that God acts, as a compassionate Father. So the reason that we ask for that in the high holidays, we know, is because God, that in the high holidays we think about God's kingship, but also about the fact that without the compassion which when modeled through God, we model to our family, and then and that resonates out into the rest of the world. And then again, this text about open our eyes to the one. I'm sorry. Keep me from deceitfulness and from false perceptions. So again, this really resonates with today. The idea that, and what you talked about, Michelle, also the idea that we can deceive ourselves, and we can cause false perceptions among within ourselves, and also we can be aware that our actions and our thoughts are false, and that when we can aware of that, but we believe that we want to encourage other people to believe in a way that's not necessarily correct. So that's the first one. The second one that I chose, hold on. As I turn the page. I'm never good at turning pages. Is the one that we actually say, the additional one that we say at Mincha. This Mincha kind of closes out the day. Elias, you want to read that one real quickly?
Sure.
Maybe, Bill? Thank you.
Yes. May it be your will, Adonai our God, to surround us with love and harmony, peace and friendship. May our horizons be filled with hope and in the anticipation of eternal blessing. Enrich us with good friends and the strength of character to enhance your world. May we rise to face the morrow, ready to worship and to serve you with our spirit committed to goodness. May the words of my mouth and meditations of my heart be pleasant to you. Adonai.
Okay,
My rock and my redeemer.
right.
Dan,
So-
can I just interrupt you for a second?
Sure, go ahead.
I mean, these are lovely prayers. These are beautiful prayers. But here's the question I'd like to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
They are just the antithesis of the world that we live in, right? I mean, they are the opposite of the world that we live in. And
See,
my question to you is, what do you do with the dissonance, with the tension, that you're praying words in the calmness of the Gan Chapel or the Rabbi Chill Sanctuary that paint one vision of reality and one vision of human encounter, and outside in the world, you have the exact opposite taking place? What do you do with that dissonance?
So I don't think that's a dissonance. I think that that our prayer lives reflect who we are as human beings. And yes, the rest of the world is definitely needs us individually. It needs us individually to act, to take the moral high ground, to act in ways that will reflect what is really the best of what human beings can bring to the world. And when we do that, then I don't think it creates a dissonance. It creates actually, as Michelle said earlier, it creates a sense of struggle, because when we see these texts and we ask God for compassion, when we see that our actions can influence others and do influence others, that when we do that, and then we use our actions instead of for deceit, that we use them for to bring more compassion into the world, I think that it's not a dissonance at all.
Can I jump in? Can I
Yeah.
jump in for a sec? Because I actually think that first prayer, you had me examine in a way I never have. And I've said these words many, many times. But one of the templates that it sets out is the idea of that even God struggles with God's anger.
Mm-hmm.
It affirms that, the sense that it's okay for us to be struggling right now with that tension between our compassion and our anger. Even God in heaven does that. And the sense is like, we need a little bit of help to navigate that moment lest we become like Lot's daughters. We actually need to have some help to clear away the blinders from our own eyes
So-
here. And that prayer really articulates that in a beautiful way, the first one.
Yeah, okay, so Dan, I'm just on the second one, the Mincha Marav one.
Yeah.
May it be your will, Adonai our God, to surround us with love and harmony, peace and friendship. May horizons be filled with hope and the anticipation of eternal blessing. So you're having Thanksgiving dinner with somebody, and they say to you, I'm just so outraged. There's all this fraud in voting. Dead people are voting. They're double counting. They're stealing the election, and these are completely unfounded allegations. There's like literally zero evidence to any of it. But it's in a post-truth world, and I'll just say what I want to say, and it doesn't have to be fact-based. I'm not in a reality-based universe, and I'm sitting at your Thanksgiving dinner table talking about fraud that is actually not real, and stealing votes that is actually not real, and dead people voting that is actually not real. All of it is deep conspiracy. All of it is baseless, without any factual basis whatsoever, but deeply felt by the person who's saying it to you. Okay. Now, what do you do with, surround us with love and harmony, peace and friendship? What do you do with that?
Good luck
It's
then.
an aspiration.
Good luck then.
Well, that's exactly what you said, aspiration, right? So if this were to occur, something like this, and I know that this is not, you're not making this up. As you said, families are not talking to each other over this. So this is where the compassion has to come in. This is where the sense of hope, as it says in this one, it says, horizons be filled with hope and anticipation. So this is the moment where we use not only our neshama but our intellect to work out with our family, and explore, as opposed to immediately turn angry. Right, and holding your tongue, right, in a certain way, and it's very difficult. I'm not saying it's not difficult, but if you don't want families to break apart, which is usually the core of what God created. The family is the core of who we are. If the families break apart, there's a breakdown in everything else. So if we can control that in some way so that families don't break apart, then that's kind of the answer. And it's not easy. We look at our ancestral families, are families that struggle with that from the beginning.
Dan, thank you for
Did
your
any of them
beautiful
get it right?
neshama, and thank you for your beautiful prayer. Elias, will you
Yes,
encircle us with some
absolutely.
peace?
Ladies and gentlemen, raise your hands. Raise your hands if you have trouble sleeping at night. Ladies and gentlemen, raise your hands if you want this pandemic to be over. Ladies and gentlemen, raise your hand if you feel that the world is full of evil. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you Hashkiveinu, the ultimate prayer for this time and age. Wes, would you read for us the translation of Hashkiveinu?
Sure. Help us, Adonai, to lie down in peace, and awaken us again, our sovereign, to life. Spread over us your shelter of peace. Guide us with your good counsel. Save us because of your mercy. Shield us from enemies and pestilence, from starvation, sword, and sorrow. Remove the evil forces that surround us. Shelter us in the shadow of your wings, O God, who watches over us and delivers us, our gracious and merciful ruler. Guard our coming and our going. Grant us life and peace, now and always. Praised are you, Adonai, eternal guardian of your people, Israel.
Thank you, Wes. So a couple of things regarding this prayer, a couple of technicalities. We believe in the liturgy that between Shema and Amidah there should be only one bracha called Geula. All right, and that is the blessing that happens in the morning. Now in the evenings, we have Geula, which is end of the Michamocha, and there is a prayer added, which is Ashkiveinu, in between the two things. Now, let's think about a couple of things. In the Middle Ages, people were, before science, or even before that, they were afraid of the night. They were afraid of what could happen to them, not only because of enemies, but also because this idea of sleeping, there are so many things in the liturgy that when we wake up in the morning, we praise God for restoring the soul to the dead body. There was a belief that we didn't know what happened at night. Now, there are a few things. During the day, there are some people who say we wear talit and tefillin, so we are closer to God. At night, we don't do that. So we need this prayer in order to get God to protect us a little better. A couple of things also that are technical. On Shabbat and during the week, the text is a little different. On the weekends, the last bracha is, blessed are you, Adonai, who guards his people forever. And in Shabbat, who spread us a shelter of peace over us, over the people of Israel, over Jerusalem. So in Shabbat, we don't need that extra protection because in Shabbat, we have what they call Sukkot Shalom. It's a beautiful metaphor of the Sukkah. All right. That being said, it's such a beautiful prayer. This idea that we are I had a terrible night's sleep last night. between the numbers of the pandemic and between the election. I don't know which one is more important these days. You know, one night I take, let's think about the election. The next day, think about the pandemic. So I have enough stuff to worry about. And, we all struggle with sleeping. And this prayer is just talking to us about that. Now, another thing that...
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
You and our singing colleagues have been singing this prayer every night since March, so beautifully. And yet our cases are higher than ever, 100,000 cases a day in our country. We're leading the world in cases, 100,000 cases a day. And I'm wondering what use, what good, what's the efficacy of singing this beautiful prayer with beautiful words when the reality mocks it?
Well, the question is, based on that, based on your thought, what's the efficacy of every single prayer we do?
That's a good question. I hope you can answer it by 9:30.
What I wanted to bring with this prayer is not so much the efficacy of it, but how this prayer talks to us in our times. There are some prayers that completely say nothing about what we are experiencing these days. I find the Ashkivenu, every night I say it, that's the reason, I bring like 4 different melodies to bring the text alive, because we tend to appreciate it differently, not only when we read it again, but also when we hear it again with different melodies.
So let's just go with that. In other words, it doesn't affect, and I think this is worth double-clicking on, saying the prayers doesn't affect the reality outside, but it does affect our internal reality inside. Whereas when we sing Hashkivenu, that gives us more strength, courage, etc. Doesn't necessarily stop cases from coming.
Right. Or when we sing Unetane Tokef, when we talk this year so much about Magefa, does it change anything of the reality outside? No, it doesn't. It changes how we perceive the understanding of the text, what it means. Yes,
So
of course.
I'm going to throw a little theology out there. There's this great theological proposition that these words are not only said to make us stronger, but also are said sort of klape mala, right? That they're thrown against heaven. God, it's time for you to show up and do this job. Clearly, Adkan, right? Through all of our Jewish history, we've experienced moments where no matter how much you pray these words, your situation around you is not going to be affected, not going to change. God is not on tap as a cosmic vending machine to do miracles for us when we want them. But why continue to say these prayers? Because each time we say them, we remind the Kodesh Baruch Hu that there's still a world in need of redemption. We are scared, we are sad in the way that, like, when my 7-year-old goes to sleep and says, please turn on the nightlight, I'm scared. As a parent, that is a call to me to try to answer that existential fear. Our God, our parent in heaven is being called, being summoned.
So you turn on, right, just go with that. You turn on the nightlight for Benjamin. What does God do for you?
Right. So what I'm saying is this prayer in some way for me theologically works as a reminder saying, God, I need the nightlight. Like you've left me in the dark. We are in the dark. We are scared. And if for 400 years our people called out in Egypt and God finally heard, my hope is that one day God will say, you know what? You're right. You need this. You need this strength. You need this redemption.
Can I move on? Because, there are so many beautiful things about talking about this. One thing that I have to read, we all have this book called Understanding Mariv, and Hoffman, one of the great Torah commentators, writes this funny line. Plagues, commonly pestilence, one of the plagues. We avoid pestilence because not many people know what it means. Yes, really? Seriously? Okay, now going back to the text, a couple of things that are really speak to us and bring the text alive to us. How many things we have in life that we take for granted, and sleeping is one of them. And the idea that we go to sleep every night and we ask God for give us a good night's sleep is to bring some, wish for something that we consider mundane and that it's so much part of us. That's one thing. Now, another thing that I want to touch is this fabulous line that it says, Ve'aser Satan milfaneinu umeachareinu. Okay? It says, the translation is not quite good. It says evil forces that surround us. By the way, we have to notice that the word Satan and all the whole this line in the
Satan.
Reform movement has been taken out. But me'aleinu milfaneinu me'achareinu. This is so beautiful. Satan milfaneinu, the evil that is in front of us. That's the evil we always see. He's terrible. He's not leading the country in the way we should be leading, or anything that it's against our principles, we think not good at that. But what about me'achareinu? Could it be that me'achareinu is the evil we have in us and we don't see? Right? Because for the other people in this country that we are so divided, we are the evils. Right? So this is such a fabulous line, such a fabulous, it shouldn't be taken lightly. And this is one of the things I love about this prayer.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeshkoach,
Elias.
yeshkoach.
Beautiful.
Okay, so my text comes from Ariel Berger's book about Elie Wiesel's classroom teaching. Just so that you know, I personally feel very much like we're living in an authoritarian regime, and there's a lot of Hitler and a lot of 30s. That's just my own personal worldview. So I'm deeply, deeply alive to Holocaust tremors, deeply alive to Holocaust tremors, deeply alive to authoritarian tremors. I'm losing sleep because I'm afraid that it's the 1930s. That's where I am at. And Elie Wiesel's classroom begins with the following story from Rabbi Nachman, who's a Hasidic master, which is as follows. Once an astrologer king saw in the stars that anyone who would eat of the coming harvest would go mad. He called in his viceroy and friend to ask for his advice. Sire, replied the counselor, you and I shall eat only last year's harvest, which is untainted, and so we shall remain sane. But the king replied, I do not accept your proposal. How can we separate ourselves from our people to remain the only sane people among a nation of madmen? They will think that we are the ones who are mad. Instead, you and I shall eat of the tainted grain and shall enter into madness with our people. The king thought for a moment, and then he said, we must, however, at least recognize our malady. Therefore, you and I shall mark each other's foreheads with a sign, and every time we look at one another, we shall remember that we are mad. So pause. I just want to unpack this parable. What is this parable saying, dear class? What's the point of this parable?
I mean, I've read the book, so
Okay.
I can I can tell you that even with Elie Wiesel and Ariel Berger, as they present this text, it's profoundly challenging because in Wiesel's description of what we're really facing with the world gone mad, and that's a direct parallel to his experience in the Holocaust and our experience with evil throughout time. But can I answer a slightly different question? Or
Well,
do you
no.
need,
Because I just want to
really,
I want to talk about what the point. I want to talk about the pshat of this parable, but before then, I would love to hear your voice. But the
Okay.
pshat of this parable, what I think it's saying is, this is about a season in which madness envelops the entire
Everyone.
society.
Correct.
And there's no escaping the madness. So, I mean, 10 years ago or X years ago, who would have ever thought that the things that are happening today could happen in the United States of America, right? Who would think that a sitting president would denounce the integrity of the electoral process without any basis whatsoever? And who would think that millions of people would say, yeah, go for that? Who would think that we would be split like this? Who would think that there's like such different narratives and counter narratives? But there we are, and when madness descends, everybody goes mad.
right. But what's so interesting about this story, and this is what I want to ask you a question about, the king calls the counselor, who's supposed to be the one to advise him, but the king is actually the one who comes up with the plan, in a sense that even
Right.
those who are advising are in some sense already mad because the proposal that they suggest is not
Right.
going to be a workable proposal.
Right.
How is that different
And-
from our reality?
Well, I actually find that to be really profound
Right.
and challenging.
Accurate.
Right. The wise counselor was not so wise.
Correct.
And the king,
Which
who
is
was
terrifying.
actually seeking the wisdom, was the one who had to come up with the unwisdom. Now, the question of the story is, so point one is madness descends. Point two is madness descends on everyone. Point three is there's no escaping the madness. When madness descends, we're all mad. When sleeplessness descends, we're all not sleeping. When insomnia descends, we're all insomniacking, right? And no one can escape this. And then the question is, what is it that is going to remind you that you're mad? In other words, is there anything that we could put on our forehead, like tefillin? What's a shel rosh that is going to remind us that we are mad? And
but based on the end of the story,
Yeah.
it doesn't get closer, not even near to
Right.
the reality.
right,
This
right. So
idea
now-
that the king says we are mad. I mean, the people who think we think are mad, they don't recognize they are mad.
Right. So in other words, the king is also mad, and the counselor is also mad, and everyone is mad in this mad universe, right? And now you can't talk to people over Thanksgiving dinner because everybody is mad. Now the question is, what's the sign when this is kind of like a hall of mirrors? When you're mad and you're living in a mad society, is there any sign that allows you to know that you're mad that can at least point you to a different kind of life? Is there some kind of sign? That's the question about this sign. We're all mad, and we're all like to use a metaphor, we're all like the fish in the ocean, and we're all wet. Is there anything that can remind us that we're mad? And in the book itself, Wiesel's answer is memory. That if you have memory and you know your story and you know your history and you know your people's story, that can remind you of the madness. But I want to close this class with a different answer for what is it that is the cure to the madness or the reminder of the madness, so that we can point to a different direction. So I'm on page 19 of the handout. I'll go on the bottom of page 18. This student asked him about Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav and when he lived. Therefore, it is likely that he knew at least some of what was coming: industrial revolution, mass movements. Did he know more? Did he anticipate the events that would shape the world in my lifetime? We cannot know. But it is clear that he saw a madness descending on the world, and he was afraid. The world did go mad in the 20th century. Is the sign that can prevent madness's ultimate victory memory? Okay? And then this is, to me, the salvation for this whole dismal season. Soleil, an African theology student, introduced herself and says, I have seen this kind of thing before, when real madness sweeps a nation, and the leaders hide behind their fortified walls. They refuse to come out. They do not take responsibility, and people are hurt. But when the leaders go with the people, sometimes things have changed. I see Professor Wiesel's gaze sharpen. Where are you from? He asks. Soleil says, I am from Zimbabwe. Then you understand this story, he says, and you must share your story. Later, Soleil comes to talk to me during office hours. She explains haltingly that her brother was killed by the Mugabe regime during a protest. She tells me that many of her family members and childhood friends are HIV positive and struggle to find medical care or do without. Indeed, by the early 2000s, unemployment, disease, particularly cholera and HIV, and food shortages were endemic in Zimbabwe, leading to widespread protests against the government of Robert Mugabe, which had been in power for decades. His supporters reacted with intimidation and sometimes extreme violence against their opponents. One of the victims was Soleil's brother. I'm so sorry, I can't imagine that, I tell her. Then after a moment, you know that Professor Wiesel meets with every student in this class, but he will especially want to speak with you. I can help you make an appointment with him for next week, if you'd like. She agrees, and I see her smile for the first time. Then, later, she told me that she met with him for almost an hour. Soleil discussed her experience with him. He asked questions. They sat in silence for several minutes. At the end, as Soleil stood in the open doorway about to leave, Professor Wiesel took her hand gently and said, I told you in class that you must tell your story. This is because even if one person learns from it how to be more human, You will have made your memories into a blessing. We must turn our suffering into a bridge so that others might suffer less. Now, I wanted to end the class on this vignette. So he has this cryptic, opaque parable from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav about a time when everybody goes mad. And the question is, when everyone is mad, what's the salvation? What's to remind you that you're mad so that you can imagine a world that is not mad? And to me, the answer to that parable's problem is found in the aftermath. That is the story of Soleil and Ariel Berger and the story of Soleil and Elie Wiesel. That is to say, encounter, relationship, two people talking to each other. And I think that in that respect, to bring this class full circle, I think that's the answer to the disgusting story of Lot and his daughters. In the end, the reason there's a tikkun there is because Boaz and Ruth saw each other. The reason that there's a tikkun in this story of Soleil is that Ariel Berger saw her, Elie Wiesel saw her, and I think that if we can not let the pathology of this season, both the pandemic and the election, block our ability to have relationships, if we can still see each other, including if we can see each other who disagree with us, that will remind us that we're living in a mad age and hopefully allow us to transcend it. Shabbat Shalom, and we will
Shalom.
see you at
Shabbat Shalom.
9:30.
Shabbat Shalom.